Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a City Limits conversation on the future of NYCHA. I'm Jean Marie Evely, the executive editor of City Limits, and I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, and I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us here. City Limits is a nonprofit newsroom founded during New York City's fiscal crisis in the 1970s, initially as a way for housing organizers to share information with one another. And while we've long covered the city's public housing system, earlier this year, with support from New York Community Trust and Trinity Church Wall Street, we launched a full-time beat devoted exclusively to reporting on NYCHA and its residents. 1 out of every 17 New Yorkers calls NYCHA home, and the city's public housing system is one of the few truly affordable housing options available in one of the world's most expensive cities. So we know conversations like this are really important, and we're honored to be hosting this discussion. And now I'm going to turn it over to our NYCHA reporter and tonight's moderator, Tatiana Turner.
Thank you, Jean Marie. This is a critical time for the New York City Housing Authority. Yesterday kicked off a monumental vote at the Nostrand houses in Sheepshead Bay. Residents there are in the process of deciding on the future of their homes. They're choosing from 3 different options on the ballot: Preservation Trust, the Permanent Affordability Commitment Together program known as Pact, and remaining in traditional Section 9 public housing. We plan to discuss each of these options over the next hour. And with more votes and developments to follow, we at City Limits felt that it was critical to have a discussion about these options and what it can mean for tenants going forward. For our viewers watching, we appreciate you tuning in, and also thank you so much for sharing your questions, which helped shape this dialogue for this evening. And to our panel, thank you for joining us tonight. As a reminder, we ask that you keep responses to each question to about 2 to 3 minutes because we have a lot of questions that we want answered, and we are planning to wrap up promptly at 7 p.m. And now I will introduce our panelists. We have Luis Henriquez Carrero, the Director of Litigation at Manhattan Legal Services. We have Brian Honan, the Senior Vice President of the Office of Intergovernmental Relations at NYCHA. We have Anna Luff, the Supervising Attorney and Director of the Public Housing Justice Project at the New York Legal Assistance Group. We have Barbara McFadden, the Tenant Association President of Nostrand Houses, a board member of the Preservation Trust, and a member of the Citywide Council of Presidents known as CCOP. And we have Aixa Torres, the Tenant Association President at the Alfred E. Smith Houses, and also a member of the Citywide Council of Presidents. All right, we are going to get started with our first question, which is, how did we get here? Why is NYCHA pursuing Pact and the trust to help fund repairs, to begin with? So let's start with Brian, and then we'll open the floor to responses from our other panelists, starting with Anna and then Luis. So Brian, if you could start us off.
Sure. Well, first, thank you so mumuch for having us, and thanks for this really important conversation. I think we are at a really important time in NYCHA's history. Next year will mark NYCHA's 90th year of existence. It really is quite remarkable. And I think the one thing all of us on this panel can agree on is that one of the most important ideas that came out of the New Deal was housing that was dedicated to low and moderate income people, and that was, built by the public and there for working people. In New York, we love this idea so much that we had federal built public housing. We had public housing built by the state of New York, and we also had public housing that was built by the city of New York. So at NYCHA, we were running 3 programs at once. Over 180,000 units, over 300 developments all throughout the city, in neighborhoods all throughout the city. The buildings were built really solid and really great. And for most of NYCHA's history, people would tell you how proud they were to live in NYCHA, how they were the lucky ones, and they felt like they won a lottery. However, around in the 90s, we started to see a real deterioration. And I think it was no coincidence, because at that time we also saw the state was first, the city and also the federal government start to disinvest from public housing. In the infrastructure, the things inside the buildings, the boilers, the plumbing, the roofs, the facade, all started to give in. Housing is about, as I said, NYCHA is about 90 years old. The average development is about 70 years old and has not been capitalized, correctly in its entire history. So think of it as a person who's about 70 who didn't really take care of themselves all that well and never went to the doctor. 70 is not all that old for a person, but if you didn't take care of yourself, you're going to have serious health issues. And many of our developments do have serious health issues. And so the one program that the federal government does offer in order to recapitalize is RAD. RAD will get you improvements in your developments, no doubt about it. In developments throughout the city that have gone through the programs, we've seen improvements. But many residents don't feel comfortable with RAD. They don't feel comfortable with a private entity in their development, private managers, private developers. And so they've told us that we want the repairs, we want the investment, but we don't want a private entity. So what we did was we worked really hard with the state legislature and we came up with a public option, and that's the New York City Preservation Trust. And we work closely with residents, we work closely with advocates, we work closely with labor unions. We came up with legislation that passed in 2022. And what really makes the the trust special is that the only way to get into it is if residents choose to get into it. I've been part of many different programs in order to improve NYCHA. Oftentimes NYCHA comes in, we do presentations, we tell you we're going to do a program, but we're going to do them anyway. Here the power shifts. Residents are the ones to choose.
Sorry, I'm gonna
all right, I'm sorry.
I can go on. Yep. I'm gonna take it to either Anna or Lewis, and then we're gonna circle right back to Pact and Preservation Trust. Anna or Lewis, do you have any response so far?
I'll just add, I completely agree with everything Brian has said about the fact that NYCHA has never been properly capitalized, and these are old buildings that deserve capital campaigns so that the tenants can have the amenities that they need to live in their homes. But I also just want to add, how did we get here? There's also been some mismanagement on NYCHA's part over the years. There's been issues with self-dealing in the past. There have been issues with falsifying reports and then taking the time after that, right? Like to make up for that and make up for the repairs that were supposed to be done at a certain time and that weren't done at that time. And so no matter which regulatory scheme any development ends up with, trust, pact, or Section 9, I think it's really important for tenants to have the ability to hold whichever management company is there or the development accountable for the repairs that they need in their apartments so that they can get those repairs in a timely manner and so that the conditions don't further deteriorate.
Yeah, I can just step right in really quickly to add another example, which is my organization, Legal Services New York City, brought a case in federal court 2 years ago concerning interim recertifications when tenants lose household income and they have a right for the rent to be lowered, and NYCHA wasn't doing that. NYCHA wasn't doing that because there weren't systems in place. There wasn't an adequate operation to actually handle this request and reduce tenants' rent. And we reached a settlement whereby all of those systems were actually laid out in the settlement agreement. So that's, to Anna's point, that's just one more example of, along with the history of disinvestment that Brian pointed out, that doesn't tell the full picture of how we got here, right? There is also a history of mismanagement on the part of NYCHA as an agency that, in my opinion, NYCHA needs to deal with, NYCHA needs to handle, no matter which of these three options, wins the vote.
And before we move on, can I just say, I will acknowledge that NYCHA has a two-pronged issue. It is a funding issue, and we do have the management issue that we need to improve on. But I also want to say that the crisis in public housing is not unique to NYCHA. It is a nationwide issue. I do not know of a public housing authority anywhere in the country that is able to run housing just on Section 9 or just in a traditional way. When I first started at NYCHA, we had 16,000 employees. We're down to 12,000. So I think it's a chicken and egg thing too as well.
All right, thank you. And we are going to move to our next question, which is for Barbara and NYCHA. So how long have you each lived at NYCHA, and what are some of the biggest repair needs at each of your respective campuses? I am going to ask Barbara to start us off because Barbara is the Tenant Association president at Nostrand, where the vote has taken place. So Barbara, if you can start us off with this question.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Barbara McFadden. I am the president at Nostrand Housing, the first vice chair of CCOP, and I sit on the Preservation Trust Board. I lived in NYCHA overall 30 years. I've been at Sheepshead Bay Nostrand for 14. As a child, I stayed with my mom in the East New York section of Brownsville. And can you just repeat the last question that I didn't really hear you. Wasn't that clear for me, the last question?
Okay, it's what are some of the biggest repair needs at your campus?
Okay, one of them was I had a lot of outages, with the intercoms, and actually right now we're working on that. I definitely, even though my residents have heat, but over in the past and over the years, they were saying, I don't know the technical word for it because education is my degree, the boiler system. They actually just finished doing the roofs at Nostrand. That was very important because that's bad when it's raining on the outside, it's raining in the residence apartment. So they definitely did a good job of fixing the roof because that was one of the major repairs that we needed here. And also the elevators. And they said that we should have that up for 2024. Some of the backlogs they talked about was they said the cabinets. And they were complaining about the wooden cabinets bringing a lot of bugs infestation. And even when they had the exterminator to come out to exterminate, they indicated that that it didn't do any good. So I don't know what it is when it comes down to that wood and paper, those bugs like to come around. That's something that I got feedback from the residents on.
Thank you. And I'm going to move the question to NYCHA. How long have you lived in NYCHA, and what are some of the biggest repair needs at Smith houses?
Okay. So collectively with my parents and my children, we've lived over 100 years, even though it's 90, right? So we've lived in NYCHA that long. Actually, me physically 60 years because I turned 17 this year. And so the biggest repairs that we need right now, and that I know for a fact, are the pipes inside the walls, but our roofs have been taken care of. We're we're replacing our boiler system, and we will eventually, when everything is said and done, our trees will be replaced that were taken down with the Sandy. And because of 9/11, and when I talk about 9/11 in Smith houses, I get very emotional. We will finally have sandblasting of our bricks. We will have new dirt. We have a special program with Parks Department in Hamilton Madison House, in which we have actually already changed the dirt because it's so contaminated in Smith that it is not to be played with. It's really to the point of really endangering the lives, not only of the residents, but of the workers that work there. So those are the repairs that we need, and we understand that. And so we prioritize the needs that we have. Smith has been very lucky in terms of the elected officials giving us money for the things that we prioritize and we feel we need, right? So after the pipes, the elevators, and then we're done. And I've told residents, please don't fix your apartments anymore until all of this is done, because you're just wasting your money. I spent like hundreds of dollars fixing my kitchen, and then they had to take it down because there was a leak in the wall, right? So I'm not doing it again until I know that every pipe on my line has been fixed.
Thank you. We're gonna move to the next question about permanent affordability commitment together and the trust. So what is Pact and what is the trust? How are they different from one another? And how are they different from the current Section 9? So Louis, I'm going to ask you, why don't you start us off with those basics?
So Section 9 refers to traditional public housing, right? What Smith Houses is right now, what Nostrand Houses is right now, public housing that is run with funding that is given by federal, state, and city government, right? Funding that is appropriations, that this is not money that needs to be repaid back to any entity. Pact is a program that Congress created about a decade ago that NYCHA renamed Permanent Affordability Commitment Together, Pact, which converts Section 9 into Section 8. There's a number of differences that come with that conversion. Most of the rights traditional of Section 9 do transfer to Section 8. Tenants cannot be charged more than 30% of their income as rent, some succession rights, some grievance rights, etc. But there are some things that do change in a change from Section 9 to Section 8 housing, right? One of those changes, and we have seen this in the caseworking organization, concerns transfer rights, right? If you're a public housing tenant, you can request a transfer to another public housing development, particularly if you're a disabled tenant or if you're a survivor of domestic violence. You can seek a transfer to wherever you need to be across the entire NYCHA public housing portfolio. That changes, right? Once a development converts to Pact or the trust, because the trust is also Section 8, we have had tenants, clients that are disabled tenants, clients who are DV survivors that have been told you can no longer transfer to another public housing development. Here's a portable voucher, a Section 8 voucher. Go look for housing yourself in the private market with such voucher, right? And that's one thing that is kind of like a major difference that we have seen in our casework with tenants between Section 9 and Section 8. And then the difference between Pact and the trust, and I think Brian pointed to this, the whole purpose of Pact is to invite private management companies and private developers. So in terms of the day-to-day, who tenants see after a Pact conversion, in terms of who they see in their management office, who they see every day, is the private landlord and the private developer. Largely speaking, in the eyes of tenants, NYCHA has sort of like left the picture type of thing. The trust has a different framework in the sense of it doesn't off the bat invite private landlords or private management companies into the picture. However, the trust legislation, I should point out, does allow the trust to contract with private entities for maintenance and management services. So the way I am reading the trust legislation, the trust could make the decision to bring in a private entity to manage a public housing development if it chose to.
All right, thank you, Louis. And we are going to move back over to Barbara and NYCHA. Can you tell us about how tenants on your campuses have responded to the Pact and trust plans? And I'm going to ask Barbara if you could kick that off.
Basically, we have been doing 100 engagement piece down here at Nostrand Housing. Like I said, we did door knocking, we did telephone conferences, we did workshops at Sheepshead Bay High School, Shell Bank, and we held numerous workshops down at the community center. And basically, a lot of the tenants were scared. And the reason why they were scared, because they felt if they transferred over, whether it was RADPAD, whether it was the trust, they felt when they went to the temporary location, they would not return back to their actual home. However, at that particular time, we had the President Bowder at hand, and we had the manager Toby Brown of Sheepshead Bay Nostrand. Toby does both sides, Sheepshead and Nostrand. She said to them that they would get a temporary lease. So I'll explain that. McFadden's in Nostrand housing at 3023X. Okay, she's at 3045 in a vacancy, which is a temporary location. I'll probably be there 6 months to a year. I still have to pay my rent at 3023 because after they repair my apartment, I will be able to go back to my actual home. My home is where I'm at now, 3023. But some tenants didn't see it like that. They were feared, they were scared. Oh, if I go over there, I'm not going to return back. And that's okay, because no tenant will want to fear that I'm going to lose my home, whether it's Rat Pack, whether it's Section 9, whether it's the trust. And I think after speaking about it, coming to the workshops, asking the questions to Brian Honan, Courtney Yu, Andrew Kaplan, to me, Valda, they're getting clearance. See, people fear what they don't understand. But when you provide residents with the knowledge, that brings forth the understanding. I don't want the force hope. Bring me the facts. And I yield.
Thank you, Barbara. And for NYCHA, can you tell us about Smith houses and what residents think about RAD Pact and Preservation Trust?
We don't believe in either. Our bottom line will be to do resident management. I'm a firm believer that the residents in public housing can manage their developments better than NYCHA. If anything, and I say that, and if I sound a little bit, it has to do with COVID. All the leadership stood up, took control, and did what needed to get done for their residents. And as you all know, and I'm not talking out of my mouth, the stats are there that the highest hit were public housing. In Smith, I had 2 double funerals, right? Because of COVID. I'm not going to talk about all the deaths I had with 9/11. That's because at this point, it's almost out of control. And we do know about it, but I firmly believe that public housing residents have the know-how and the skills and the education necessary or able to learn, if we don't know, to run our own development. And that's where we would go. And that can only be done under Section 9, not Section 8, not Pact, only under Section 9. I was told by a reporter that I'm considered a thorn in the side. And I said, I'm a thorn in the side because the 964 regulations gives me that right to be a thorn in the side and to ask the questions, and we're supposed to be able part of the process from conception. And so in my development, I have committees, and my residents run the committees, not NYCHA, because it can't be a one-man show. So clearly, if there are options, there is options within Section 9 to help our development. It would be resident management. And that's why I don't believe in, when as a CCOP member, we voted 9-1. I'm not going to tell you who voted how, not to recommend. Someone on the CCOP board said, we don't trust the trust. And it's not that we don't know or that we don't think we have residents that can sit on the board as Barbara, that are quite capable of sitting on a board and running it. But that's it.
Thank you. We're going to move forward with the next question, which we frequently hear. Why can't the various levels of government just fund NYCHA's capital needs without turning to these other plans? So I'm going to ask Brian, how would you answer that?
So, I mean, ideally they could, right? But what we've seen over the last, decades is they haven't, right? And so if we use history as a guide, unfortunately, nationally, the public housing program has been all but abandoned as well. And, the state housing, that was built by New York State under Governor Pataki, he totally abandoned it in the 1990s, and the city did the same, soon after 9/11. So while we do see contributions locally, and the state upped their game, and they've given over $1 billion since 2015. It's not, it's a little bit too late, right? In a lot of ways, in order to meet the needs that we have. We have about a $78 billion need right now at NYCHA. And so we need to go where the money is, right? Louis had, mentioned earlier that the primary focus of Pact is to bring in private landlords. It does bring in, a private element, but also brings in a tremendous amount of money. Since we've done Pact since 2016, we've seen $5 billion investments in developments, and that means 200 new boilers, it means 150 new elevators, it means upgrades to roofs, it means upgrades to facades. So we need to find a way to preserve this housing, and we need to use the tools that the federal government offers. We need to use tools that the state offers. We need to use whatever we can, because if this housing is in jeopardy, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers are in jeopardy.
All right, thank you, Brian. I'll ask Anna, do you have any comments that you'd like to add?
I actually see that Luis has he's off mute, so maybe he has something that he wants to say. And
after you, Anna.
No, I really, yeah, I'm still thinking about it. So
I just want to say something real quick about Rat Pack, because Brian mentioned that. I think earlier you said, Brian, no doubt conditions improve with Rat Pack. We have seen my organization conditions improve in some Rat Pack project. We have seen my organization tenants who have come to us saying that the repair and rehabilitation work after a Rat Pack conversion has been very shoddy. Not only that, we have had meetings with HUD officials ourselves, in which HUD officials have told us that they do not oversee Rat Pack rehabilitation work done by the private landlords. All they do at the Office of Recapitalization in HUD is to deal with the transaction, make sure that the conversion happens correctly, and then they exit. Okay, so I do not agree at all that it's a situation where it's no doubt the lives of tenants completely improve after a Rat Pack conversion. That is not what I have seen entirely in terms of the tenants that my office does work with. We have seen that for sure, but there are instances in which we have not seen that.
Thank you, Louis. And Anna?
I'll just add an example of that, because we are seeing the same thing as Lisney is in terms of post-conversion conditions in apartments. And one example that jumps to mind is a client of ours who lives in Ocean Bay Bayside. She had been living in this development for a number of years post-conversion when she got succession to the apartment after the tenant of record passed away. And then Section 8 had to come in and do its inspection in order to give her her Section 8 voucher. And it failed inspection. It failed inspection, Section 8 inspection, multiple times. So that's a development that's not meeting NYCHA leased housing's own standards several years post-conversion. With somebody who is very involved in her community, keeping people, putting in tickets, requesting repairs. It still wasn't up to snuff. And beyond that, in that case, when it came time for the mold abatement, which was one of the reasons why it didn't pass inspection, the way the mold was abated was just painting. They painted over it. And at that point we were like, just get the voucher and then filed an HP. But I wouldn't say that even capital repairs, but even just, again, individual units, making sure that they are meeting the housing maintenance code. It is an uphill battle in RAD.
Thank you, Anna. And Brian, do you have any response to either Louis or Anna about these concerns?
Look, I think they're always going to be issues, and if tenants have issues that they're going to go to Anna and Luis, they're not going to call them up and say things are great, right? In their developments. But if anyone was at Ocean Bay before conversion and you compare it to now, I don't think anyone would say it was better before, right? What we see in Ocean Bay is new elevators. We see resilient boilers that are on the roofs of the developments. We see much tighter security. It is, truly night and day. I'm sure there are individual problems. I'm sure there are tenants who definitely have issues that are serious and need to be taken seriously. But we also have seen a recapitalization in that development and in other developments that would probably take decades, and we're seeing the improvements done in a few short years.
All right, thank you. And Barbara, I'm asking you, you are a member of the Preservation Trust Board and have come out in favor of the trust. So can you tell us about how you came to that decision?
After living in NYCHA for 30-something years, and I had got a whiff of how the federal government stopped funding NYCHA within 20 years, or maybe could be more. I felt like the tenants needed another option, and that option was the trust. Section 9, RADPAD, or the trust, but they needed another option. I mean, that's like I can go to the store and buy a pair of Coach, Michael Kors, and Nike shoes. That's when you're presented with options. That's when you're presented with choices. I don't think, in my opinion, it should have just been Section 9 or RADPAD. I am glad that we have the choice, because now that I'm a resident, I have a choice, because I voted today at No Student Housing whether I want RADPAD, trust, or Section 9. I was given an option. NYCHA didn't say, or the trust entity didn't say, Barbara, you choose this. I made my own choice. The residents have the equal opportunity to make their choice, and that's the way it should be. I do not want to sway anybody for the trust, even though I support it. I want all my residents to be neutral, be optimistic. I want them to say, well, I chose the trust, I chose the RADPAD because of so-and-so. That's why we was doing engagement, providing them with the knowledge and the tools and answering the questions, because we want them to make the better choice. Make the better choice that's going to bring in the needed repairs, that's going to bring in the funding. Because guess what? If we don't fix our developments, it's going to collapse. And I'm not going to wait for the falls. I'm not going to wait for the walls to come crumbling down. I don't know if I'm going to be here 10 or 15 years, but I know that I'm here now. No one is promised tomorrow. So if I have the equal opportunity today to vote and make a difference in my development, I'm going to do it. And I'm quite sure other residents feel the same way.
Thank you, Barbara. And in terms of both Pact and Preservation Trust, many tenants have concerns about potential relocations while repairs are underway. So, Brian, how would you address that relocation process? What does it look like? And what message do you have for any tenants who are worried about displacement?
I don't think they need to be worried about displacement, but I definitely understand that tenants have concerns about relocation. The trust legislation, it does, give the residents the right to return, and that's in the legislation. So don't believe me; it's in the legislation. So for tenants who do need to relocate, it is a temporary relocation. Ms. Torres mentioned earlier that our plumbing needs to be replaced, and that's probably true for almost every development. If we're going to replace plumbing, we have to get behind the walls. Behind those walls, there is asbestos. We also want to make sure that we abate all the lead in the apartments. We want to make sure too that we address the mold issues. So when tenants, have to leave the apartments, especially tenants who have, respiratory issues, to temporarily relocate, our goal is always to keep people within their development. So we're moving people, a line at a time, a floor at a time, a building at a time. So this way their lives are not disruptive. NYCHA takes care of all the relocation costs. So there isn't a cost to tenants, but This is a huge concern, a concern I've heard from many tenants at Notion, probably the number one thing. And it is definitely, I understand the anxiety around it. But the thing I tell people is that when you come back to an apartment, you're coming back to an apartment that is going to be safe. It is going to be renovated, and is going to be the apartment that you really, said and had a hand in, creating.
Thank you, Brian. And do we have any additional thoughts from our panelists?
Okay, so I just want to say this, that one of the things that we have to do as residents individually first is make every single elected official accountable, from Washington, D.C. to the Albany to City Hall. And I don't think we've done that. I hope that that Tuesday, residents in public housing went out to vote and voted with thought and concern about the future of our homes. We have some advocates, and then we have people who feel they know what's best for us. And that's been my biggest issue. We can speak for ourselves. Us not supporting part of, as a member of CCOP, not supporting this whole trust has been, and the law has to do with the actual fact that the voting is really not democratic, because at 20%, any vote in any election has to be at 51% for something to pass. And that's not the case with this one. And even though as a member of Residents to Preserve Public Housing, we have pushed that it be at 51%, right? At first, NYCHA only wanted 10%, and then we pushed at 20%. But the reality of it is that if it's a true democratic vote, then it should be 51% of the vote. That whether they go for the trust or whatever they decide, that the residents do that. And so therein lies the major concerns that we have with the law, that we have as resident leaders who oppose it. This is not, and we know we need the repairs. God knows we need the repairs. But I caution everyone to be very clear about how we vote and how we protect. And then the biggie is how much mortgage and who is going to guarantee if there's a default in our developments. Because I know what Smith is worth.
Excellent, thank you. I'm actually circling back to you in our next question, but I just quickly want to see if Brian has any response.
So and thanks so much, Ms. Torres, for your comments there. I just want to clarify too, the 20% is 20% turnout. The winner will be the plurality, whoever gets, so whatever option gets the most choice, but the turnout is 20%. And that is in line with, we had an election just this week, right? And in my district, we had a highly contested council race, millions and millions of dollars spent, and we got about 20% turnout here. I think, if we work hard, and I know that residents are really informed, they're going to come out. They're going to come out and vote. And in the end of the day, it's residents who have the choice, here. So it is not, 20%. It's not the choice that gets 20%. It's the turnout that gets 20%. And that was the way we came up with that figure. That was, working with residents, working with advocates, and working, with NYCHA together. That was not a decision NYCHA made on its own.
All right. And my next question is, privatization is a word that comes up often concerning residents. So in terms of the Pact plan, it brings in private developers outside of NYCHA to manage campuses. So Aixa, what are some of your concerns about the involvement of private management?
My biggest concerns about private management is that they don't respect residents. That's number one. Number two, they don't have a clue what our issues are. Number three, historically, when places are prioritized, the residents end up in limbo. They go to NYCHA, and then they go to the developer, and it's a back and forth. And at the end of the day, the residents are the ones who lose. It would be, especially the elderly, and that is a big problem for me. I mean, I'm 17, right? So I fall in that category, but I have people who are older than me who live in my development. My development is slowly but surely becoming like 65% senior, right? And some of them are not as involved. Some of them, their health has been really taking a toll on them, that they don't even have the energy to pick up a newspaper. And so that becomes a real issue about me not trusting. And I tell you, one of the biggest faults that I find with NYCHA management is doing all these private agencies to come in to do the parking lot. It has been a nightmare where I live, right? That's an example where I was told to my face by a tow truck. I told him, you need to tow this one. And he said, no, that's a police officer. We're not going to do that. Meanwhile, I had somebody come visit their mother who's sick, and they were going to tow their car. And so though I'm just giving you like an example of what I've seen when we get private agencies in our developments. They're terrible. They don't care. They're really bad news. And I think that we could do a better job. Once again, I'm going to talk about resident management and about us controlling and developing our own system, as NYCHA was a long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Exa. I'm actually going to circle back on voting and the concerns about relocation. I did see Barbara had her hand up, and I'm going to go to Barbara and then Lewis about voting and relocation concerns. So Barbara?
Yes, I did have my hand up, and what I want to just put on the record is that, it's time for a change. And Obama said it the best: change is for the better. If you keep doing something the same way and you don't get results, no matter who you are, what you made of, what's your status, what's your quota, what's your title, you have to try something different. So with that being said, I lived in no-strand housing 14 years under Section 9, and I got no results. I got no money, I got no results, because the federal government stopped funding us. So with that being said, I want to try something different. I'm talking about McFadden, and some of my residents felt that way. Not all, but some felt that way. I want to try something different. And not only that I want to try something different, I'm not being a negative nanny about it. Maybe I would get some results. Maybe I would see something different, because as I said, no-strand housing is over 50-something years, and we need a new boiler system. We definitely need those new elevators, and these roofs just got done. So with that being said, if we don't take care of our buildings, we don't take care of the land, it's going to fall apart. Time doesn't wait for anyone. So all I'm just asking, as being an advocate, you have to try something different. I do believe change is for the better. And I want to make one quote on the record. When we did have slavery at that time, they told Harriet Tubman it was illegal for her to go out there freeing the slaves. But she said in her heart, even though she was breaking the law, she felt that slavery was wrong. So what did she do? She freed those slaves, even though her head was at the counter. They was putting bonds and everything out there to kill Harriet, but she felt it was her mission. That was my mission. I went to Albany with Brooklyn South and numerous residents advocating for us to get this bill passed. My residents of New York City housing, 5 boroughs, the state, they should have a voice at the table. They should have the equal opportunity to have more than one choice.
Barbara,
we can't keep...
Barbara, question for you. Speaking about voices,
yes.
What has the turnout looked like so far? Because it's day 2 of voting. So what's it look like so far?
Okay, as I do know, the engagement piece, we was getting about 67 percentile of the residents coming out. I don't have the actual tally. That's something we can get, me and Brian and the whole engagement team can get back to you on, because some did vote online. And we would have to just, it's not the actual vote, because you know that the in-person is around Brian, I believe the 26th, 28th. So we will have the countdown, but just to get a rough draft, we would have to go online and look at it to say, this is where we at, even though the voting is not over as yet.
All right, thank you. And back to Louis. Louis, you wanted to say something about relocations, right?
Just very quickly, it is true that the trust legislation guarantees the right to return to tenants who are temporarily relocated during any rehabilitation work. But again, what my organization has seen in our casework is that it often happens that tenants who are relocated sign temporary leases that don't have an end date. And they are otherwise not given clarity or transparency in terms of when is it that they will get to come back. And sometimes years go by. We have seen the news of the relocation plan in Chelsea Elliott, a Pact development, where it is indicated that it will take 7 years for the rehabilitation to be completed. That is 7 years that families are living in temporary housing. And in that situation, not all of the families get to return because life gets underway, right? If a temporary relocation takes years, oftentimes families do get permanently displaced. And so what I have seen is a bit of a disconnect between a right of return on paper, tenants having that right, and in actuality, relocation scenarios where tenants are not given clarity in terms of how long this will take, when they will be able to come back, and then years go by, and then some families actually end up moving on, and they never get to return. And so I personally would like to see developers, public and private, NYCHA and others, really try rehabilitation scenarios in which there is no broad relocation or very minimal relocation, because relocation scenarios, in my experience, it is not always the case that all of the families that got relocated get to come back.
All right, thank you so much, Louis. I'm going to jump to Brian. What happens after the vote, and how will NYCHA decide which campuses vote going forward? And when will the next vote be scheduled? I know that was a 3-part question, so if you need me to repeat any of those,
Sure.
but go ahead.
Sure. Soon after the vote, we'll, of course, announce the results. And I just want to make sure it's clear that NYCHA is not running the election. We're not the election administrator. You have an outside company doing that, because people have had concerns about NYCHA running elections before. So we have a firm that does this professionally. And so when the results are announced, we then will go through. Let's just use a scenario that it is either one of the investment strategies is chosen. So either Pact or the trust. We would go through continued engagement with residents on the scope of work. We'd also go through, putting the financing together, and then a disposition process that needs to be done with the federal government. All of that takes about 18 months. And then, we'd have a closing, and then, we would, begin work. What is different too about the trust and, other programs too? Within the legislation, it gives residents the right to choose the contractors who will be doing this work. One of the things that I heard complaints about was the quality of work, done at NYCHA, and that's something that we've heard from, many residents. The contractors will, have to go before the residents and make the case why they will be the best contractors and why they should be the ones doing the work, and the residents will be able to choose them. So the relationship, again, is very different there. They will be working for the residents. Residents will also have the ability to create quality assurance committees. So it's one thing to have a really good interview and say, hire me and I'll do the best job. But if they're not, residents can call them out on it, or residents can encourage them to continue to do the job. So there's still a lot of work to be done after a vote is taken, but we will then be on our way towards investment.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. And Anna, do you have any response?
On this, no, I don't have a response on this.
All right, Louis or any other panelist? Okay, we're going to jump to questions from the audience from our RSVP form. Thank you again for those who are watching who submitted their questions. The first question that we have is, why can't we just use tax revenues to fund public housing?
I mean, I think that's a question for the legislature, really, on all levels. But so that is not I don't think a question on for anybody on this panel.
Okay, and also, Brian, I'm going to hold you. What's going to happen to the tenants that don't qualify for Section 8? The quote is, everyone is just going to be put out on the streets?
No, there'll be no displacement, on this program too. And you're grandfathered in, whether if you're a resident, who is in the development, both under the trust and Pact as well. So there is no displacement. Also too, and this is long, this is into the future too. The next tenants coming in off the NYCHA wait list as well. So this is, tenants coming in off the Section 8 wait list. So this is not, we're not going to see anything like a vacancy decontrol situation or things like this. This is housing that will be, for as, as long as we're all around and into the future for low and moderate income people.
All right, we have a question about the Nostrand houses. So will it be in writing that tenants can return to their exact apartment in Nostrand houses?
Yes.
Right. And how would the process go for individuals with disabilities and parts with children with disabilities?
Is it the relocation process?
So yes, and this is I'm actually getting another question which is related, but someone said, I am disabled. Can I put in for a transfer even though Pact will be taking over my building?
I mean, at some point we do close, but it depends where I would really like to get the person's individual information, but it does depend on where they are in the process.
I can jump in on a case that I mentioned earlier, which is a client that is disabled, mobility impaired, requested a reasonable accommodation transfer to another public housing development at a time when his development was still public housing, was approved, and he was put on the wait list. While he was on the wait list, the development converted to Pact and he was kicked out of the wait list, and he was given a portable voucher and told that he needed to look for housing on his own, even though he is mobility impaired. So I made this point before. I'm going to make it a little bit again. The ability of families to transfer is one of the biggest changes you get when you go from straight public housing to Section 8. Again, when you live in public housing, you have the ability to request a transfer to any other public housing development, and then you get on those wait lists. When you become Section 8, mostly what happens is that you're given a portable Section 8 voucher and told to look for housing on your own.
Yep, and Lewis is 100% correct. It is a big difference between the two programs. The subsidy is different. So when you're in Pact and then in the future in the trust, it is Section 8. The subsidy, for public housing is Section 9. I think ideally our goal is to make sure that we have a transfer process that works, for all, three programs. And I think that's something that, we look forward to working, maybe as a group, this group can also work together on that as well.
NYCHA? NYCHA?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to say that two things about the trust before we move forward to everybody. There's only 25,000 vouchers that are actually available. And so I don't know how the selection's being done, right? But I just want to put it that there actually are only 25,000 vouchers. There's, 110,000 units. So for the trust, that's what's there right now. And when you talk about Pact, I have people who are saying that they don't, or that they, once they move over, they have no response to repairs. They have no response to anything, not even, the 30% rent issue that you have in Section 9. There are real protections under the Section 9 in the process that are not either in the trust or in the RAD because they're not there. And I read the trust about the 964 in it. It's 2 sentences, and it only talks about one section of the 964, which is the 15.0, which has to do with resident councils. Okay, there's several other sections in 964 that offer other protections, including, once again, and I'm going to hammer this, I'm going to drive everybody, resident management and what it entails, the money, the rules. And for the record, we also would have to have a vote to go to resident management. It's not a, I decide that I'm going to do resident management on my own as president of the board. We would have to take a vote. But I'm very confident.
I'm going to jump to Anna, and then we're going to jump to our likely final question from the chat.
Thank you. And thank you, Ixa, for bringing up these issues, because I just want to push back a little bit on the idea that these protections are all the same and nobody's going to get displaced. Luis brought up earlier the issue with transfers. We know in other jurisdictions that have adopted RAD, they do allow transfers between Section 9 and RAD. And those housing authorities make that happen. So the fact that that's not already happening here, I think is a big concern. But also, there's just not the same process, right? Like, in theory, people don't get displaced because they don't get rescreened for Section 8 if they qualified for Section 9 after conversion. But people get displaced for other reasons. They get displaced because there just isn't the procedural due process under RAD that there is under Section 9. They get displaced because there's no meaningful grievance process. They get displaced because they go to management and management can't give them the right answer. And then management sends them to the CCC and the CCC sends them back to management. And they end up in housing court for something that should be easily resolved. Again, because there is no meaningful procedural due process under RAD. And so people are still getting displaced during the conversion process, after the conversion process. And there is little recourse for them, especially if they don't have access to meaningful counsel who happens to know somebody at NYCHA who can help them with that. And that's a huge problem.
Thank you, Anna. And I have a question for Barbara. We have tenants on here living at Nostra, and they're in the throes of the vote. What message do you have for those watching tonight?
Okay. For all the residents that's out there, Barbara McFadden is going down in history. And the reason why I say that we're going down in history, because Nostra is the first to do the voting process. That is history because it's never been done. For all my tenants that's out there watching, if you're still nervous, if you're still anxious and you got questions, I don't have a problem with pulling up at the office at 2344 Bragg, coming to meet you at apartment 1C. We can sit down and talk. They're open from 9 to 5. I just want you guys to make the best choice. And I'm not here to sway you. Section 9, RAD Pact, or the trust. But whatever you make the best decision.
All right. Thank you, Barbara. We are 1 minute away from 7 o'clock. So do you have any final thoughts from our panelists?
I'd just like to say thank you for offering the opportunity for all of us to be able to present our point of views. Barbara is a colleague, right? We sit on the same board. We have differences of opinion, but we have to respect that we have differences of opinion and people should be able to hear it. My one biggest concern is that this election, and I hope that a lot of people come out. I know when I had my election as president, I had 300 people come out and vote. And so I would hope you have more than 300 because this is a life-changing event in your development. And I will pray that grace is with you, with the whole development as they vote. And I thank you again, Ms. Turner, for allowing us to speak and to share our votes. And for the two attorneys, thank you for the work that you do for the residents in public housing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would also like to thank City Limits and the other panelists. I think this is a really important discussion, and especially for Ms. Torres and Ms. McFadden, it is, what's so great about this moment is that, switching the power, to the residents to make decisions of what's best in their developments. It may be very different from one development to the other, but giving residents that power, I think, is the most important thing and the most important part of this conversation. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Brian, thank you.
And I just want to thank everyone. It was awesome. I'm glad that we had the equal opportunity to hear everybody's, thoughts, ideas, opinions, and facts. Everybody voice matters. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are going to wrap up tonight's discussion. It was lovely and also very informative. I hope you all watching, it was informative for you all. Please know that at City Limits, we are covering NYCHA closely. So if you have any tips or story ideas or even want to put in for an op-ed, we welcome that. So remember citylimits.org, or if you want to share any tips, NYCHA@citylimits.org. Thank you all so much and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, it's enjoy the